This one is probably the toughest to call, would we say, Gregor?
Yeah, I think so. Mainly because you just don't know if it's possible to stop Erling Haaland. I don't know whether the familiarity is a positive or not. He's just a phenomenon, and promises to be another fascinating game. Seeing him doing very little, but always knowing that he's prowling, menacing, and capable of winning the game. So, I really enjoyed watching Norway. I think they're to play Brazil and have, I think, 66% of the ball. Make more than 300 more passes than them. Part of that is to do with the way Brazil approached this game and other games under Ancelotti, but also it shows that Norway are happy being the kind of the team in control. But they've got different sides to them. They're a bit like England in that regard. They can play like that, and they can also sit in and soak up pressure. I've got some big kind of physical, dominant defenders, and one of the best midfields, I think, in the tournament. I've absolutely loved watching Patrick Berg. I think he's been outstanding for them. So much energy, but also really neat with the ball at his feet. Odegaard has been a warrior actually for them, as well as the kind of the midfielder who's got that bit of craft and guile. And Sander Berg kind of complements them. I think there's a real balance to their midfield. So that's another big strength to them, and it'd be interesting to see what they who they choose out wide after making the changes at half time in the last game, bringing on Oscar Bob, taking off Nusa and Sorloth. So not entirely sure how they'll set up in this game, but it's a very, very hard one to call, but mainly because of Haaland.
Tom, thoughts on this one? I mean, of England's 53 different defensive options that they've already used at this tournament, basically tried every defender in every different position. I mean, how do you answer Gregor's question? You can't really stop Erling Haaland, but what is the best approach? Stick Dan Burn on him for a wrestle? Play Stones and Guehi, who two teammates at Manchester City? Where do England go here? Do they stop supply lines? What's the option?
Yeah, they adopt the sort of, Mexico rear guard in the final 11 minutes just for the whole thing. Get the back five in action, get Burn on. You can't, right? I mean, you can't. We know because we cover the Premier League week in, week out, and we often come up with these questions about how do you stop Haaland. You can't. You have to get close to him. Obviously, you have to keep an eye on him all the time. And I guess Guehi, knows him well, at least. That's the best thing you can say. But this is not an area of strength for England, right? The way Norway win this match is if Haaland has a good game and England's defensive problems come to the fore. England's strengths are not in defence. We've seen that. I mean, even in the Mexico game, they conceded soft goals, and we can talk, and people have written, brilliant pieces about the togetherness and the unity and coming through what was, clearly a war almost in the Azteca. But in the black and white football performance, there were still problems with that England game, in my opinion. Did that make me think they are better equipped to beat the best teams in the tournament? I don't know. I still think that defence is a major problem, and now they're coming up against, with all respect, not Raul Jimenez, who is, a decent Premier League striker. They're coming up against the best, striker in the world, and that's a problem for England. If they're going to win this match, they're going to win it in other areas, right? Norway have a good team, and Berg and Berg, for example, in midfield have had a really good tournament. Equally, I think Anderson and Rice would feel like they can win that battle. I think England going forward now, it feels like Gordon had a really good game against Mexico. I think Saka looks like he's kind of coming into a little bit of fitness. Hopefully, obviously Kane and Bellingham are in scintillating form. And in a way, Norway will be looking at Kane and Bellingham and thinking, these are two absolute, stars who are playing fantastically. Can we keep them out? And I think that's where England win this match. If it comes down to a Haaland versus, England's central defence, then England aren't going through, in all honesty. But if I think coming out of the Azteca with the kind of feeling of togetherness and momentum that England have, I think that will stand them in good stead in this game. Thank goodness they've had nearly a week to recover, because I feel like if this was a sort of a Premier League season where that was a European match and they had to play a match 3 days later, they'd be in real trouble, because I suspect they're completely exhausted right now. But I think overall, they'll have enough to beat Norway.
England have to stop the supply line to Haaland, and like you can't do that when it's from back to front. You just can't. You have to be well. You have to have someone covering at all times, and someone who's tight and doesn't allow him to turn, or does their best. But you can try your best to stop crosses and deliveries from wide areas. And the way Scheiderlup kind of skipped down the line against Brazil and was allowed to put that cross in, that was it. I don't know how that ties into England's issues at right back, and also, Nico O'Reilly is better going forward than he is defensively. But that's something there that's really, really important, because we saw how he just comes alive in those moments. So it might sound simplistic, but it's kind of true, because those kind of him getting the ball in tight areas around the penalty box and stuff. That's not his biggest strength. It's when he's got big open spaces to run into when it's played from back to front, or when a cross comes into the box and he can steal a yard, or he can just overpower his opponent. That's the avenues that England need to be most aware of.
Do we think then it could be a similar game to the one you outlined, where Norway are having more possession then, and that England are actually just trying to stop the passes and stop the kind of quick turnovers and things, and actually England are the ones looking for the quick turnovers, as they did against Mexico in that 98-second blitz?
I think there will be periods of the game like that, but I think kind of the game state will be important. If England take an early lead, then yeah, they'll be content to do that. And I think we've seen that already in the tournament. If not, then you need to try and take the game to the opposition. So yeah, it will be an interesting tactical battle, but I think how the game sort of unfurls as well will be important.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, another part of this tournament that we maybe haven't heard from you on is the brilliance of Kane and Bellingham. As you say there, the Game Podcast Norwegian equivalent will be sat talking about how do we stop Harry Kane, in the same way we're talking about Erling Haaland. I think actually that's where Alison Rudd's been for the last 2 weeks. She's not actually been at Wimbledon. She's been seconded to the Game Podcast Norway version after all her brilliant and wild praise for them before the tournament began. It has been fantastic to see Harry Kane, hasn't it? I mean, deliver on the world stage in such a brilliant, I am clutch, I am the superstar of this team and I will drag you through.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think, actually. I was lucky enough to do a lot of covering Spurs between kind of 2014 and 2022. And at the time, we always this thing about Kane being underrated, whatever, yada yada yada. Not anymore, but I do think I sort of look back now and think what a privilege it was to cover Harry Kane. To see Harry Kane playing for Spurs in the Premier League week in, week out, because you think now this guy is probably going to go down as England's greatest ever player. I think and maybe he'll go down as a World Cup winning legend. You never know. Like he might even win the Ballon d'Or this year if kind of things work out. And I always come back to that thing with Kane, right? Like it's a different thing to Messi and to even Lamine Yamal, for example. He's a sort of Andy Murray sportsman, right? Like he's someone who has just worked and worked and worked. And you talk to all the kind of, when you do these sort of profile pieces about Kane, you talk to the people at the beginning, they don't talk like they do about other superstars, where they say, he got the ball and he scored 8 goals, or we knew we had to put him up three age categories because he was so good, with Kane, everyone sort of says, he was all right. He was all right. But actually, he asked a lot of questions, they sort of say this kind of thing, or, he was always really curious, and so they're almost trying to find things that were good about Kane in those early days, because in truth, he wasn't a superstar, and he never has been really, in the early days of his career. But to have sort of extracted that much end product and brilliance, just from sheer practice, and to got to where he's got to now, which is ultimately, I think he's the outstanding centre forward. We talk about Haaland as a kind of a finisher, out and out predator, but I think as an all round centre forward, I think Kane is unmatched at the moment in world football. And I think in Bellingham and Kane, if you ask me why are England going to win the World Cup, if I sort of put my hat on in 3 months' time and look back, you're clearly thinking it's because of Kane and Bellingham. Why will people in 30 years' time say, why did England win the World Cup in 2026? It was because Kane and Bellingham were absolutely on fire, and if they can keep that going now and deliver those decisive moments in the biggest moments now in the quarterfinals, semi-finals and possibly final, that's what's going to win England the tournament.
To get there then, you're thinking they will beat Norway then, Tom, as a prediction?
Yeah, I do. I do think they'll beat Norway. Yeah, I have a slight concern about a hangover after Mexico, just the sort of get going again factor. But I think it's enough, the space they have, and I think they'll have enough. Yeah, I think they'll win.
Gregor?
Yeah, just. I think the same is true of wide areas will be so important. Like, you've watched some of this tournament, and David Muller-Wolf, the Wolves left back, has looked really good going forward, but then he's a little bit suspect defensively, and in fact he didn't. There's a reason why he didn't play all that many games for Wolves last season, and that's a team that were relegated. So I think, again, if Saka's fit and available, he can get the better of him. And Gordon against Ryerson, I think Gordon could have the legs over him. So England depend a lot on those players producing, and we saw that in the Mexico game as well. I don't know. I'm talking myself around this. I think England should have enough, but I think it will be tight. I think it could be cagey. I think it could go to extra time.
Yeah, really interesting. One of my favourite moments on this podcast, and there are so many, is the Gregor Robertson deep intake of breath after I've asked him for a tricky prediction, as he looks inside himself and think, am I actually going to say England are going to win this game? Yes, he has.
How's he got on, Gregor? What's his prediction sort of rate been like in this tournament?
Solid. I mean, he covers himself, doesn't he, Tom? Let's be honest. There's a lot of hedging that goes on. He says one thing and then actually gives a good excuse as to why it should actually be the other thing. So
yeah, he's a coward, really. Yeah.
He's safe from the clip economy. You know, Jonathan, our amazing video producer, could probably produce a clip for him saying any of these teams could win the World Cup at some point along the way. He's a canny operator like that. As well as Alison Rudd falling in love with this Norway team in general, I have fallen in love with their social media content. It is the most wonderfully joyous thing to watch all the time. But there was a really good video after the win against Brazil, and their manager talking about, we had a plan and you guys executed it, so they will definitely be ready for England. I just think England are going to, I just can see this semi-final. I just think they'll get there.